from the federal government, where it has no business being at all, to the state government, which is, of course, much closer to what you're interested in, and the law there can be modified, changed, enhanced, softened, according to the wishes of the people in that state. I'm always sad when I see that these materials cannot be legalized until we have scientific studies that show that they are safe, and then no scientific studies are permitted to be run. It's, to me, a very disturbing conflict.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, do you have any personal recommendations on either things you can do or medications you can take to help reduce the side effects of psychedelics, negative side effects?
What negative side effects?
Well, feeling depressed the next day, or maybe feeling kind of weak or backache, or anything. Do you guys do anything before you do psychedelics or afterwards?
No, generally, we go into a psychedelic experience with an empty stomach and an open mind. And not knowing, especially in the older days when you're making new materials, you don't know where it's going to go. And so you have to be attentive, and have to be open, and have to be honest, and have to take very careful notes. Because sometimes the next day you say, what was it that happened just before something happened? And you look at your notes and they're there. So on our own early research work, it was very much open. You saw where you went, you recorded where you went. If you were not feeling very active the next day, you wondered to some extent, were you short of food? Were you short of sleep? Were you having difficult sleeping? Maybe there's a stimulant aspect of it that disturbed your normal patterns. And to each person, each drug is different. And I think you have to know yourself as well as know the drug to know how to compensate for these differences.
A lot of people, after they'd come down from MDMA, used to complain of headaches. Some of them pretty bad headaches. A lot of others, including myself, never had headaches from MDMA. I think if you'd taken a psychedelic, which MDMA is not, and the next day you had a sore back or aching muscles in your back or in your neck, I would think carefully about whether you had gone through some tensing up, and if that might have been due to some stress. In other words, go back over your experience and try to figure out why your body might have tensed in such a way as to cause sore muscles the next day. You just, as Sasha said, you have to know your own body and have a pretty good idea of where your psychological buttons are. And then, do a good job of reviewing your experience to see if you can get clues. Okay? There is a very important question. Do you feel any of the drugs you've taken have damaged or altered in a negative way your brain? Which ones and how? Yeah. No. It's very hard to answer that one. Both of us suffer from memory lapses, and fortunately the names we've forgotten do seem to come back. But that seems to happen to a lot of people, including people who've just reached their 35th birthday. So I think it's a normal part of getting older. No, I really don't. And I've made some mistakes. Before we knew that much about MDMA, I used MDMA for, I think it was about a year and a half, once a week. It was my writing drug. And most of my work in Pikal, the first book, was written under the influence of MDMA. It was just the perfect thing for me. It just let things flow in a stream from inside. Of course, by the time a year and a half had gone by, I realized I was using 250 milligrams instead of 125, with a supplement of 100, and it occurred to me that that wasn't too good. So I quit it, and about 2 years later, I took it again just to see if perhaps my tolerance had changed. And I took it at 125. And what it did for me, now this goes for me, not for everybody else, was it gave me an experience of depression, which is totally opposite of what it had done before. General negativity, and I realized I'd lost that drug as an ally. But at least I learned, and from then on, I've advised other people who want to use MDMA. First of all, don't forget the law. It's serious. Second, you better make sure that what you take is MDMA, not some god-awful mixture called ecstasy. And that's hard to get somebody to analyze what you've got. But if you do have real MDMA, I advise not to take it more than 4 times a year maximum. That way you may keep the magic going.
The magic, I've heard this from many, many people. I've taken it this many times. The magic seems to have disappeared. And when I talk to them later, they try it again, the magic has not reappeared. It's the first 2 or 12 or 22 times that it's used. It has that incredible magic. And that diffuses and disappears. It may be, people will say, well, I know some people who'd insist that's because there's brain damage. I think that's nonsense. But the thing is, their brain changes. I'm sure there are, because this is something that was not there before and is there now. The analogy I like to give is, you can say the same thing about a higher education. There are irreversible brain changes that take place in the course of getting out of college. So it's not brain damage just because there are changes. Sure.
Yeah.
With the possible exception of MDMA seems to be the only true empathogen. When are you going to find another one that works as well?
Well, I've been working recently with some things that have the smell of MDMA. I refer to them as antidepressants because this avoids complications with the analog drug bill. There are no antidepressants, by the way, that are Schedule 1, as far as I know. So, but one of the compounds I had recently explored a little bit was called methylone, which is MDMA skeleton with a carbonyl in place of 2 hydrogens on the beta position. The analogy here came from the idea of ephedrine. Ephedrine and Sudafed are compounds that are very much like amphetamine, except they have a hydroxy group over here. And I wondered if this possibility, the hydroxy compound, ephedrine, that's ephedrine, the one without the hydroxy group is methamphetamine. So I wondered if methamphetamine was active because it went in the brain and was oxidized to ephedrine. Whereas you give ephedrine, it doesn't not much of it gets in the brain. So I said, why not go to the methylcathinone route and put a carbonyl in that position, and it would go into the brain and be reduced to ephedrine. So I made the methamphetamine analog of MDMA, which I then say, oh, maybe it goes into the brain, it goes to the hydroxy, that's the active thing. The carbonyl compound should go into the brain and be reduced to the same material, and MDMA and this methylone should have the same action, I would think.